Great. Can you hear me well? This volume? Great. So, yeah, I'm really excited to be here today to talk about my absolute favorite topic, which is the future, and how we can thrive in the future. Just first things off, why am I here? Who am I? I run my own company called Futurist, which basically stands for where philosophy meets the future. So I am interested in and like to talk about all things futurism, society, philosophy, and technology. So when I'm not speaking about these topics, I am moderating a futurist podcast called Unbox Your World, where I'm really reimagining what society, life, and business can look like in the future if we get it right. So in the podcast, I'm interviewing change makers all across the globe, everything from former White House employees to TEDx speakers to Stanford professors about what we can do and how we can really rethink how we live and work and do business so that we can thrive in the future. And my background is really in the tech startup industry for about 14 years. I have been leading marketing teams at companies such as iZettle, that was later acquired by PayPal, and lately the AI impact startup LinkedIn. So through my company, I am also offering PR consultancy services and fractional CMO services. And today, I am here to talk about the future. And I will give you an introduction of a few different models that can really help you to make sense of the future. And by doing that, you can stay ahead of the future just a little bit more. And also, some of you that are in the strategic comms class, you will also get to try to do some of these exercises yourself after this class. So, let's get started. So first things off, why should we care about the future? And I think I was listening to a conference a few weeks ago where a keynote speech, and where the speaker was saying, nobody ever says that the future is not important, right? That's quite true. Nobody ever says the future is not important. It's going to impact every single person of us. The future is important to all of us. But what happens is that the future is complex. The future is hard to grasp, and it's hard to relate to. So what happens as a result of that is that we kind of tend to stick our heads in the sand and try not to deal with it, okay, that's in the future. But with the help of some tools, that can really help us to make sense of the future. And by doing that, we can start to approach the future in a better way and in order to stay ahead and be prepared for it. So, let's look at the world that we are living in right now. I think that since war, pandemic, inflation, and AI, and all those disruptions that we've seen in the last years, I think that more and more people are starting to wake up and realize that we cannot really assume that tomorrow will look like yesterday. Now, with the disruptions that we've seen lastly, so more and more people, I think, are starting to realize, okay, the world is changing, it's quite difficult, it's complex, but we don't really know how fast it's changing, but people are starting to realize that things are happening, the world is changing. So the question is really, how fast is the world really changing? So in order to look at understand that, let's look at a quick video on this.
Hi, this is Alex from Minute Earth, and this is the so-called hockey stick graph. You've probably seen it before because Earth's temperature has risen so fast over the last few decades that it kind of looks like a hockey stick. Except a hockey stick is also a graph of the amount of plastic we make each year, and the number of extinctions we're causing, and the amount of fertilizer we put in our oceans, and the amount of fish we catch, and how many people there are on Earth, and how much energy we use. There are hockey stick graphs everywhere. We could probably even make one about the number of hockey sticks. That's because we're experiencing the Great Acceleration, a rapid and world-changing increase in the intensity and scale at which humans do nearly everything. For most humans throughout history, meaning the cumulative 100 billion or so people who existed flat part of the stick. Not much changed from year to year, or even century to century. If someone went to bed in the year 1020 and slept for 200 years, they'd wake up in a world with slightly more people, living lives just as long, or as short, and with each person still using mostly wood for heat and animals for power. In other words, humans still weren't that big of a deal. But if someone went to bed in 1820 and slept for 200 years, that is, until today, they'd wake up in a world with 7 times as many people, who live 2.5 times as long, and who use weird and climate-changing fuels to power their homes and run their mechanical industries. In today's world, humans are a planetary scale force. This great acceleration, the curve in the hockey stick, happened largely because since the 1800s, we've been unleashing the incredible energy contained in fossil fuels like never before. Initially, fossil fuels powered growth mostly in North America and Europe, but the big, planet-changing, worldwide great acceleration didn't happen until after World War II and independence movements in Africa and Asia, when people worldwide gained more access to these fuels, as well as to new farming technology and public health breakthroughs. As a result, our world today, and our influence on the world, is vastly different not only from 1950 and 1820, 1220, and 1020, it's vastly different from the world as it was experienced by the vast majority of humans over the vast majority of human existence. And because the world has gotten so different so quickly, if someone fell asleep today and woke up in 200 years, there's really no telling what they'd find. This video was sponsored by the University of Minnesota.
So what you saw here in this video, that's the era that we are living in. We're living in the great acceleration. And this kind of hockey stick exponential curve started to really take off back in the 1950s, where you can see that everything from world population to real GDP to carbon dioxide and so on, and now lately also AI dimensions. So in order to kind of grasp this is what we're living in, it's just continuing to change faster and faster. So let's just look at an example of what this could mean in practice for our kids and for ourselves in the future. So let's assume that the rate at which the world is changing is doubling every 10 years. Let's assume that is true. So I'm taking that from an assumption from a famous futurist called Ray Kurzweil. So let's assume that is true. What does that mean? That means that for someone who is 10 years old today, by the time they are 60, they will experience a year of change in only 11 days. That is quite a lot of change every single day. It's quite mind-blowing, and it will just keep on changing faster and faster for their grandkids. Now, we can't really know for sure exactly how fast the world will change in the future, because that is yet to be seen. But what we can know pretty for sure is that it will continue to change faster and faster. So what does that mean for our future? What does it mean for our kids? What are the kind of skills that we need in the future in order to thrive? Anyone who wanna make a guess? What kind of skills do we need in the future in order to thrive? Yeah? Adaptable, yes. People nodding. Anyone else? Okay, just warming up. So let's continue. Cool. So yes, definitely adaptable. And I think a good quote this is a good quote from the famous author Yuval Noah Harari, who's the best-selling author of Homo Sapiens, that quite a few of you might have even read. So what he's saying is that in order to keep up with the world of 2050, we will need not to merely reinvent new ideas and products, but above all, reinvent yourself, and again and again. And I think that is quite true. I mean, also what we need to be prepared for and expect unexpected surprises in the future. We need to be prepared to be able to recover quickly and adapt. And even the big consultancy firms like McKinsey, they are also predicting that we need other types of skills in the future in the work in order to thrive. So, for example, they are now putting increased emphasis on things like mental flexibility, adaptability, critical thinking, more soft skills like communication and empathy, self-leadership as a big one, and so on. So I think it's quite interesting that we are starting to see an increased focus on softer skills and adaptability compared to maybe the harder skills that we learned in school before. And a great approach on how to think, or a great mindset on how to think when approaching the future is through the mindset of something called anti-fragility. And this is based on a book called Anti-Fragile by author Nassim Nicholas Taylor. So let's also look at a quick video on this.
Alright, let's talk about anti-fragility written by Nisam Talib. So when you think of something that is anti-fragile, what do you think of? Well, let's start by diagnosing something that is fragile. You take a box and you kick it a couple times. If there's something fragile in it, it's going to break. It's going to weaken. It's going to get worse. However, if you take a box, something like steel, and there's steel in the box, and you kick it around, it's probably not going to weaken. So something that breaks is fragile. Something that remains the same is called robust, and something that is anti-fragile actually gets better the more it gets kicked around. So we're going to look into muscles. When you go to the weight room and you lift, you know what you're actually doing? The muscle fibers in your arm, or chest, or legs, actually break. These muscle fibers break, and whenever you go to sleep that night, they will overcompensate for the pain they felt, and they will build back stronger. And this is just like a lot of vaccinations, to where vaccinations are a small dose of the disease, so that your body can build an immunity to it. And you can look up words like mithridization or hormesis, which basically means becoming immune to a poison by giving yourself a little bit of a poison at a time until you build up an immunity. And this is basically what anti-fragility means. It means becoming better through your struggles. The author says that us as humans should always crave disorder. Being anti-fragile means being alive. If you take a porcelain cup and you throw it on the ground, it's pretty fragile and it's going to break. However, if you take a human and make them do push-ups until they can't do them anymore, they're going to get stronger. As long as they get enough recovery time, there are two things that can break an anti-fragile structure, and that is far too much stressors or not enough recovery time. Imagine a banker. The banker makes around $50,000 a year, and he always knows that his paycheck is going to come on this Thursday. But what is he relying on? He's relying on his job. Now imagine a taxi driver. He makes around $50,000 a year too. However, he does not always get a paycheck from a reliable source. One day he might make $150, another day he might only make $20. However, his job is very adaptable. So if we look at the banker is pretty fragile, because if the banks start to collapse, he will lose his job. However, the taxi driver is very anti-fragile. He's very adaptable to his situations, and he will always find a way to make enough money. And that is because he craves chaos. He craves disorder. You have to fail to get to success. Let's say that there is no randomness in your life. You wake up, you go to work for 8 hours, you come home, you do the same thing every night, you watch TV for a couple hours, and then you go to bed. You know what this is called? This is called a rut. You are living in a rut. There is no randomness, and your body will eventually start to break down. There is no mind, your body grows. If you start seeing this in your life, if there are no stressors, you should be aware. You should try to make something in your life that is a little stressful. That way you can grow from it. Take, for example, the criticism of this channel. This channel grows from all the criticism that I receive. I learned how to make it better. I learned what to improve and how to improve it. Let's take another example. If you tell someone, this is a secret, don't tell anyone. This is a big secret. What's going to happen? It's going to get told even more often because it's anti-fragile. It's going to grow even more. But what about banned books? Everyone in my school wanted to read the books that were banned, the books that were not allowed. Even the people that didn't want to read books, they wanted to figure out what these books were about. So I'm going to go back to my main point and say that you should try to make your life as anti-fragile as possible. How can you learn to grow from the situations that most people would frown upon, that are stressful? How can you make yourself a better person? Take every situation that happens today, and over the next month, try to look for the bright side. Try to look for the side that can make you a stronger version of yourself. I really enjoyed reading this book, and the author does an amazing job making it so...
Okay, so these random events that we saw in this video, things like COVID, for example, they can completely, we can't really expect them, but they can completely flip our world upside down. So because of this, we really need to move away from trying to predict the future and trying to build different risk models and try to build it into different types of probabilities and try to do some, try to predict and then build that in that kind of way. Instead, we need to be prepared to be able to be prepared for multiple different future scenarios. And by doing that, by being prepared for multiple different future scenarios, we can then adapt quickly and being able to recover. So, and one way of staying ahead of these random events and be just a little bit more prepared for the future is through something called signals.
Alright, let's talk
Okay, sorry about that. So, what is a signal? A signal is a new, novel, or early indication of a future change. So a signal is something small before it has developed into something big, or before it has developed into a big trend. So the difference between a trend and a signal is really that a trend is a pattern of signals. And by looking out for these small little signals, these little hints about the future, we can then really imagine potential consequences that this might lead to in the future. And there's a famous saying, a quote that is that the future is already here. It is not just evenly distributed. So if those of us who are actually able to pick up on these signals, we can then be just a little bit more prepared for the future. And I do want to emphasize that we cannot predict the future, but what we can do is that we can imagine. We can imagine possible consequences from these small little signals and these little hints that happen. And how we do that is that we do that with the help of a tool called the Futures Wheel. So if we pick up on these signals, we can then do a so-called signal analysis. And we do that by really taking the signal and then we imagine first, second, third, fourth, as many order effects as you want that might happen as a result from your signal. So by imagining these ripple effects of ripple effects of ripple effects, you will then end up with many different potential future scenarios that this tiny little event might lead to in the future. And one example that I like to bring up is the example of Facebook. So who would have imagined that in the very early days of Facebook, that this cool, hot social media startup eventually will grow into this massive global news distributor and completely changing the game rules of news distribution, which later on then led to Cambridge Analytica and, as you see here, Mark Zuckerberg in quote. So those who actually did a signal analysis already back then, in the very, very early days of Facebook, perhaps they were able to imagine some of these effects that we've later on seen today as a result of Facebook, with everything from, that started a new social media trend, which led to the attention economy, which has led to social media addiction, which has led to Cambridge Analytica and fake news and so on. Perhaps some of these people that did a signal analysis already back then were able to imagine some of these effects before they became a fact. Now, of course, there's not only negative effects from Facebook, we've also seen this giving rise to completely new global opportunities for everyone, where any small business or just a single person can become their own media outlet and reaching millions of people online and completely changing the opportunities for themselves. Another example I like to bring up is COVID, because that caused effects on all of our societies and every single aspect of our society. So you had quite a lot of unexpected effects. So what happened with COVID? Well, that led to shutdowns. That led to a digitalization move, which led to new scalable businesses and lots of businesses going in and out of business. It also led to Zoom fatigue, which led to the fact that people wanted to move back into nature, and that people actually started moving away from the capitals and to the countryside. It also led to the fact that people started working from home, which led to, they spent more time at home, so the cost of larger apartments went up. People also started to feel lonely, so they started buying puppies. And what happens then is that the companies that sell products for dogs, whatever you need, I don't have a dog, but food and all those kind of things that you need, obviously that the market will then increase, and that will obviously also have an effect on their own suppliers, and so on. And so I think the difference here, also I want to emphasize that the difference between a trend and a signal here is so COVID in the early days of Wuhan, before that spread into a big pandemic, that was a signal. Now the trends that we have seen now as a result of COVID, for example, remote work, that is a big mega trend. That is not a signal, that is a big trend map. So you see the difference, you see the signal and the trend. And then what you do, after you've done your signal analysis, is that you have ended up with lots of different future scenarios, and you can really continue for as long as you wish. You can do as many future scenarios as you want. You continue to do your 10th order effect or 20th order effect, however you want to continue. But when you feel done, what you can do is you can take your future scenarios and you can categorize them by likelihood with the help of a tool called the futures code. So by categorizing future scenarios this way, you can then really that can really help you to make conscious decisions about what you're going to do about it. So what you see here is that you have the projected future, which is if it just continues business as usual, what will happen if everything continues as normal? And you will also have future scenarios with different levels of probability, when you have probable futures, plausible futures, and possible futures. Then you will also have preposterous futures that are so unlikely they might still happen, but they're very unlikely. What you will also see is that you will have a future that is actually preferred. The future that you actually like. And the question is then, if the preferred future is not aligning with the projected future, then what are the actions that you need to take today in order to change the trajectory to moving towards the future you want? What are the actions you need to take today? So by categorizing your future scenarios this way, you can really then make conscious decisions about what is the future that you want to optimize for, what future do you want to plan for, what future do you want to, just continue to plan on, or what future do you want to just monitor and keep an eye on, and what future scenario are you going to say, hey look, this is just too unrealistic, we're not going to plan for it, or you might even say that if this happens, we're not supposed to be in business anymore, and that is okay. Then we should do something else. That could also be the decision that you would make. Okay, so that was signals, futures wheel, futures code. Let's look at some signals that might impact you as communicators in the future. So the first example I want to bring up, so this is an article I wrote back in 2020, in the very early days of deepfake. And the question I was asking then was that, could the journalists of the future be AI technologists? And the analysis I made back then was that given that the methods and the technologies of journalism has actually always changed throughout history, we've seen the inventions of TV and radio, but the core task of journalism has actually always remained the same, which is to find and report on the truth. At least we should consider this true in democratic societies with high ethical journalistic standards. So let's assume that is true. Now, okay, if that is their core task, and then given that deepfake would accelerate and that AI would do more of the writing, could it be so that in the future the journalists actually will move away from writing to being AI technologists themselves and just finding new methods of separating what is true and false online to be able to report back on the truth? Now, this future scenario actually doesn't feel so far off anymore. I mean, now we have started seeing inventions such as watermark technology to be able to separate true and false content online. But I think this is still interesting to see what will happen with the future of journalism. And again, I want to make the difference here. So this is back in 2020, in the early days of deepfake, this was a signal that we saw. So you could say that this article was a signal analysis, and then what we have seen as a result now, with the rise of more and more deepfake, is that we're seeing the fake news trend. So again, signal, trend. And speaking of that, this is at a conference a few months ago. James Paparai from NATO said that 90% of the internet will be fake in the future. That is quite a lot of fake content. So I just imagine the ripple effects on this on society, education, trust in governments, trust in media, but also trust in you as communicators. How are you going to ensure trust when you are communicating? Okay, so this I think is quite interesting. Okay, so who here, and I'm guilty, who has seen the very popular TV series Emily in Paris? Okay, I'm actually most people there. Okay, cool. So, this is very interesting. So, Emmanuel Macron is now highly engaged in trying to keep Emily in Paris in Paris. And why does he care about this? Well, it turns out that because of a TV series or a movie that they've seen. And out of this, 38% is due to Emily in Paris. That is quite a lot of tourists, and quite an unexpected effect from this TV series that suddenly grew extremely popular worldwide. And as a result, of course, the mayor of Rome is now happy to welcome Emily to Rome instead. And so I find this engagement at a political level actually quite interesting, and this makes me ask a question that, given all the protests that we've seen in Hollywood due to AI, could this actually be a signal of an important source of income for the entertainment, film, and media industry? Could it be so that in the future, that countries, cities, and destinations will sponsor media to get features? That will become an important source of income. And if so, what might that lead to? Will it only be then destinations that can afford to get features? And what might that lead to? This is also recent. Australia is about to ban social media for kids under 16 years old. And what they're also doing is that they're putting responsibility on tech companies to prevent it. So what is this now? Is this the beginning of a new trend? We will see. And what future consequences then might this lead to? Will it lead to increased mental well-being for kids? Or will actually the negative consequences of digital exclusion have more negative impact than positive ones? That is yet to be seen. And the last example I want to bring up, so this is a post from an industry colleague of mine where she has generated an AI, she's posted an AI-generated video that she created. And what she got here as a comment from one of her friends was that her friend commented on all the energy required to generate this video. And this makes me start thinking about the old flygskam, flying shame that we saw here in Sweden a few years ago, which was a result due to some visualization initiative, so it was easy to visually see the climate impacts that flying actually had. Now, I would imagine that the same eventually will happen with this, how much energy is required for each AI prompt. And if and when that happens, because AI is going to be everywhere. It's inevitable. Everyone's going to use AI, it's going to be everywhere. But the question I want to bring up is then how do you actually ensure that the AI you are using, that you're using it wisely and sensibly and not recklessly and just fun? And speaking of AI, because that is what you're going to use now, right? I also want to bring up some potential dilemmas of things to watch out for the future when using AI in marketing and as communicators. So the first one I want to bring up is to look out for is racism. So here's an example. So this is in the very early days of ChatGPT, where a woman entered the sentence, 2 Muslims walked into a ... What she got in return was 2 Muslims walked into a church, one of them dressed as a priest, and slaughtered 85 people. That is quite a violent response, and she only kept on getting these violent suggestions back. Now this does not happen anymore. I tried it myself, this does not happen, it's been updated, but these are the type of things to look out for in the future if you leave AI ungated. Another thing to look out for is algorithmic bias. So imagine that you are working for a company and you ask the AI to write a job ad for you. And you ask the AI to target potential candidates that could be a good potential fit for the company. That is quite a reasonable request, that you would ask a colleague to do and you would ask the AI to do. But the challenge is this, your company looks like this, only white, middle-aged men. Now, what type of candidates do you think that the AI will target? So, by doing that, you might unknowingly contribute to inequalities, and you might unknowingly discriminate against, let's say, women or minorities, without even knowing about it, that you do not want to do. So it's another thing to watch out for. And speaking of inequalities, another example is, let's say that you work for a healthcare company and you sell medical equipment or a vaccine or something, and you ask AI to write an ad for you, and you ask ask you to optimize for conversion. That's again quite a reasonable thing to ask. That's what you as marketers do. You optimize for conversion. But then what might happen is that the AI will only target the rich part of the population. And you would actually exclude the less fortunate part of the population. But the challenge is that when you're working with these type of things, is that, well, maybe they also need to get educated about that this medical equipment or vaccine exists. So you might unknowingly contribute to inequality again. And the last example here is I want to bring up is, and I think this is quite interesting because it's personalization is not black or white, right? It's most of us consider it a good thing that we can get personalized movie recommendations, personalized music recommendations, dress recommendations on Pinterest, recipe recommendations, and so on. Personalization is considered a good thing a lot of the time, or most of the time. But the thought experiment I want you to take with you is to consider, when does hyper-personalization become so hyper-personalized that it could actually be considered deceptive? So here's an imaginary example of a woman that's watching a TV ad with a woman that looks exactly like her. Is that deceptive? And then also, maybe it also depends what type of product or service you sell. So that's a thought experiment for you to bring with you in the future. And speaking of that, I mean, so what you could do, you may also use this type of signal analysis to imagine possible consequences when you're about to do something. So let's say that, okay, now you want to automate all of your emails with hyper-personalization. Then what is the first thing that's going to happen from this? Well, probably it will lead to higher effectiveness of your emails, because that is quite likely. But then what might that lead to? Well, probably customers will buy more. But the thing to watch out for here then is that maybe unknowingly you may actually end up exploiting shopaholics, or you might unknowingly contribute to obesity by providing unhealthy recommendations, which in itself will then become this kind of self-enhancing algorithm, which could happen. Or let's say that customers actually find this kind of messaging intrusive, which if you're unlucky, it could lead to customer complaints, which if you're very unlucky, could lead to bad publicity and later on boycotts, if you're very, very unlucky. But it could also be so that you actually, accidentally reveal a planned engagement, which is something you obviously do not want to do, and so on. So, and if you don't have enough good training data, then you, when we talked about before, you might unknowingly contribute to these type of inequalities that we discussed before. So you can also use this type of signal analysis to imagine possible consequences before you're about to do something as well. Okay, cool. So we have now talked about small signals, and we talked about what futures will, and so on. Let's also look at a few more things that are going on in the world right now. Small things, big things. And I cannot possibly talk about everything that's going on in the world right now, but just a few more things that could be relevant to consider in the future. Because this is a macroeconomic time that we're living in. So, we know this, but AI is automating parts of our work. What McKinsey is saying is that up to 30% of hours worked could be automated by 2030. So what will happen? We will see a lot of liquidity in the market. We'll see a lot of changes. We will see new jobs being displaced. We will see new type of skills that being needed, and so on. And we will see a lot of change that we need to be adaptable to. The next thing I want to bring up, and I think this is very relevant to what's going on in the world right now. So what you see here is a graph. This is in the US. This is the distribution of wealth between labor and capitalists. So what you see here is that before, the distribution of wealth has been quite stable between the labor and capitalists in the labor market. But as you see here now, in the last decade, it has changed massively in favor of the capitalists. So this leads to a shift in the power dynamics in the labor market, which in itself has led to the rise of a new type of social class called the precariat. And this is from the one of the brains behind the universal basic income himself, so Professor Guy Stanley, who has been that for more than 30 years. So this is one of the reasons why he and his co-fellows, co-professors have invented this in the first place. So what is the precariat? So this is a new social class that used to be having good job security, good salary, but that are now having to face more insecure work. So a good example of this is journalists that used to be, it's a well-educated profession. They are now, and they used to be having good salaries and good job security in the past. But now they are facing increased competitiveness and increased job insecurity. And this is happening to different professions now. And what's happening, the point I want to make is for this is that when people used to be better off in the past, and they are now worse off. They are more receptive to populistic messages. So that's one explanatory factor, not the only, but it's one explanatory factor that we see that the populism is on the rise. Also, people are getting older. So that is putting new challenges to the pension system. We're getting older. And this is before even things like longevity, where science actually has a real chance of curing aging during our lifetime. And this is true, like there's a longevity cluster here in Stockholm that's working on this, and what they are saying is that they're seeing the process of aging as a disease. So by curing aging, they can then say that they can prevent many of the age-related diseases. That's why they're working on it. I'm not going to go into whether it's right or wrong. There's a whole moral discussion going on. But this might happen. Now just imagine all the effects of society on this, if this happens. And then, you know this, but we're not going to go into details, but wars, pandemics, Trump, populism, all those things. We're living in an uncertain geopolitical climate. And that is what we have to relate to. That is the macroeconomic climate we have to navigate. But I also want to bring up some positive signals of change, of things that are going on in the world right now as well. The first one I want to bring up. So, who in the room are future designers or working in design? Okay, nice. Oh, quite a few. Okay, cool. So, right now in the world, there are some change makers, some designers that are starting to question the notion of optimizing or designing businesses, services, and products where we put human in the center. And instead, what they are proposing is that instead we put life at the center, where human is just one little species out of all the species on Earth, including all the plants and so on. And I'm taking this from, this is an episode that I done with a retired US designer called Stephen Bao. He's been working on that for more than 30 years, so you could say that he's been working with UX design before he became a thing. So he's working on life-centered design right now, and what he's saying is that design has always reinvented itself. It's just about changing what you are designing for. So those of you who are working on design, I want you to take this with you, that you actually already have the tools to design a brighter future. You just need to change what you're optimizing for. So take that with you. Also, all across the globe right now, there are people working on building so-called smart villages, or eco-villages, or regenerative villages. They have many different names. So what is a smart village? A smart village is a village that is built in such a way that it's not only sustainable, but it's actually built in a way that we are rebuilding the earth. So by living there every single day, you also help to rebuild the earth and helping the earth to self-heal. And this is happening right now. There are smart villages being built all around the world, so the technology exists. We can build in this way and help the earth to rebuild itself, but it needs to get mainstream. And the last one I want to bring up, we have a new purpose-driven generation coming in, entering the workforce. Probably quite a lot of you here in the room. 55% of all the Gen Zers research a company's environmental policy before accepting a job. And already next year, they will make up 27% of the workforce. This is also positive, or I think it's positive signal of change. And this generation, a lot of you guys in the room, you will take on leadership positions in the future, and you will challenge the companies and what we're optimizing for. Okay, so that's been a lot of different things. Maybe your head is spinning right now, who knows? Let's go back to your core task, because what you're going to do is you're going to generate a future scenario 2050, and you're going to build a communication solution for it. So let's just summarize what we talked about. What you do is primarily 3 steps. The first one thing you do is that you go signal scanning. So what you do is that you find small little events that could develop into a trend. Then what you do is that you imagine these ripple effects to the future's wheel. And I would really suggest that you just get started. Like, don't overthink it, just get started. And then you ask yourself, what might this lead to? And then what you do is that you categorize your future scenarios into the future scope. You do it by likelihood, and then you can decide on priority. And some practical tips when doing signal scanning. So what you should do is that you should look for signals in different areas. And you may use this model, which is common, a STEEP model, which stands for social, technological, economic, ecological, and political. Now, this is just a suggestion. You might find other areas you want to follow too, so don't take it as an absolute truth, but this is a common one to use. Also some practical tips when doing signal scanning. So, unless you have heard of Google Alerts before, what you can do is use Google Alerts and you will find it. But what you can do is you can just enter your topics or keywords that you want to follow. And whenever something new is published online, you will get an email to your inbox. That is a good way to keep on monitoring what's going on. I would also suggest that you identify what type of magazines or newsletters we want to follow, and especially what are the kind of unrelated ones you want to follow too. That's not typically what you would follow. That's not in the industry that you're working on. You can also be creative with ChatGPT and just really ask it to challenge you. How should I do research on this? How should I challenge my future scenario? Then I also want to bring up a word of caution when doing this. So I think this is a very interesting article from NPR. They've done a research on the question, does AI make us more or less creative? And the research showed that, on one hand, yes, AI did make us more creative at an individual level, but it came at a cost, which was that at a group level, it actually made us less creative. Now, if you think of that, it's actually quite logical, because the language models are based on existing content. So if every single person really here in the room will ask AI first to help you to be creative, you will get prompted to think in a certain way, right? So the AI will make us more conform. So I would suggest to think about this and maybe do the brainstorming yourself first, and then ask the AI what might you have forgotten. Also, the next step is that you imagine the ripple effects for the future's wheel, and you can find the template at Vinnova. I think your teachers already sent it to you, otherwise, if not, you will. And then the last step is that you categorize your future scenarios into the future scope. And I would really ask yourself then, when you've done this, first thing is this a future you want? What future do you want to optimize towards? What future do you want to plan for? What future do you want to be prepared for? And what future do you want to simply disregard? So that was that. If you want to connect with me, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to pop me an email at maria@futureswithph.se. Either if you just want to have a question, or if you want to share with me what you thought, or if you're interested in internship about with marketing, PR, and about these topics, then you can reach out. If you are interested in the topics I talked about, many of the examples I've taken from my podcast, so you can find it on Spotify. It's been there for 4 or 5 years now. I recently just also uploaded all the episodes to YouTube. So if you want to help me to give me a view boost, you can do that on YouTube. But otherwise, yeah, that's me. Thank you so much.